Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Mosaic Podcast again. I mean, it seems like I could record this because every time I have a guest on, I am so excited for the opportunity to spend time with them. But this time especially, I'm super happy to invite you to spend time with me and Kylie Slavik. Kylie, listen to the way she describes herself. I think it'll talk to you. It'll talk stories to you. And stories is exactly what we're talking about today. Okay? Kylie calls herself an accidental digital marketer with a lifelong obsession for story. That obsession took her around the world where she listened to some of the greatest storytellers the world has ever known to find the magic ingredient of what makes a story move people. She found it. And her life now is sharing it. In one day, she told a story that created one of the most successful campaigns in women coaching history. Since then, she's been reverse engineering why that worked. It like almost was a big shock, right? and helping other people get results using stories. She can do that for you too. In her spare time, she's working to end human trafficking and cleaning up the oceans. We'll put this down in the show notes, but her website is kylieslavik.com. I'm not going to spell it for you because it's going to be in the show notes. You can go there. They're pretty good. Hey, Kylie, welcome to the Mosaic Podcast. What an absolute joy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's always a pleasure just to talk to you and to talk to whoever else is listening.
Yeah, it's amazing. We live probably 3 miles from each other maximum. And we get to talk to each other right now through the screen. Because
I know, right?
we don't get to see each other. Between my monastic-like life and your busyness of clients, we hardly see each other. Let's jump in. When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you were, like, what's your first memory of what you wanted to be as a child?
I love that. So 2 things, and they're really seemingly contradictory. So the first one was an astronaut, and the second was a farmer's wife.
Oh, wow. Wow. I can't believe how many people actually want to be an astronaut.
I know.
I mean, when I ask that, it's improportionately measured. That's but then a farmer's wife, what was it about a farmer's wife that you loved, the idea?
I read this book when I used to read a lot of books. You know, my mom told me I would take 3 books in the car just to go 15 minutes because just in case I finished one of them. And there was this book about a farmer and his wife and how they were like selling little vegetables out by the side of the road every day. And something about the story just really attracted me. And I was like, I want that life. And, you know, I got over that at some point, but.
Well, you're pretty much putting your vegetables in a car and selling those same stories now, but it's cool. And so what most scared you growing up?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I had a recurring fear of someone kidnapping me out of my window, which I think is because I was really young when I watched Stephen King movies and other kind of movies, and I probably shouldn't have been watching them, you know? So I was always afraid of that. I had a weird fear because I grew up in the 80s. So I was born in 79, but most of my growing up was in the 80s. And then there was a lot of stuff going on with Russia at that time. It was kind of post-Cold War. And I was like the kid on the bus where everybody was talking about video games and you know, the girl or the boy they had a crush on. I was like, oh my God, what happens if we go to war with Russia? That was like a thing.
Wow.
And yeah, and now I'm kind of like, okay, well, there's so many overstimulating things to be afraid of that I'm just not afraid of them anymore. But yeah.
Go ahead.
But back then I just had a thing with it. I was really worried about it.
It's so interesting because when I grew up, and they have studies that show this, and it was exactly my experience. When I grew up and went to school, kids were most scared of bringing home a D on their report card.
Not me.
Right? By the time you were growing up, kids were scared of nuclear bombs and things like that. And now kids are scared of being shot and not even coming home from school.
It's crazy, isn't it?
So it's amazing how the world has moved and shifted, and what as we've grown, we've sort of devolved also. But
yeah.
So what did you do with those fears? Like, how did you walk past those fears?
If you ask my therapist, she would tell you I spent a lifetime over intellectualizing everything, you know. But I think that I really tried to inform myself and do a lot of research to understand like the bigger picture of what was going on in the world. And I think that, yeah, like understanding things helped in some way. I also became an activist when I was maybe 15, 16, and I did a lot of like, I was in that sort of punk rock raver kid anarchist subculture in my little small town, which I think probably had maybe 12 people in it. It's like a town of 30,000 people.
Where was that town?
Upstate New York, Binghamton, New York.
Wow.
It was the
Wow.
same town that Rod Serling, who wrote The Twilight Zone, grew up in. So,
So you had reason to be scared of being taken out of your window with
I
the
mean,
Twilight Zone, right?
it was a weird place. It is a weird place. I mean, I'm glad I grew up there. It gave me a different perspective on life than some people get, but it's a bit odd.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's so interesting to see the stories. I mean, we're talking about stories
Yeah.
and the stories we create as kids that are of
Mhm.
what's going to happen to us, of how we're going
Mhm.
to grow up. Um, what did people say to you, do you think was that they thought was your greatest strength as a kid?
Mm. Yeah, as a kid, I was really, really curious and really persistent in wanting to understand things. And I think that people noticed that. I think sometimes it was frustrating for the adults around me, but I think that they also admired it. Because when you have a little kid going, but why, but why, but why about every little thing, and sometimes it's like, just be quiet.
Right, right. And so what's interesting for me is I'm trying to see how, so to speak, the mosaic of those moments of your
Yeah,
childhood
yeah.
contributes to the person you are today. Do you see anything in there that are those pieces that from those
Mm.
you became sort of what you are without going so much yet into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see it because with the work I do today, it's a lot of deconstructing what appears to be true
Wow.
and sifting for what is actually true and then finding a way to take what is true and amplify it. And that's really, I can see that I came out doing that. I was like, well, what does this mean? And why did they say this at church? And why are they telling me this at school? And I don't understand why I need to ever learn math. And like, that's just how I was.
So it actually seems like you constructed a lot of stories that then you had to deconstruct, which is really what we all do.
Yeah, totally.
And how beautiful like, I love your answer and how clear that is, because it really makes so much sense, because one of the things you talk about is when you change your story, you change your life,
Mhm.
right? And part of what you do is help people tell their stories.
Mhm.
How did you go from where you were
Mhm.
to becoming a storyteller and becoming an accidental digital marketer?
Yeah, when I graduated from college, well, I can backtrack even a little bit. The first thing that I went to school for in college was environmental science and forestry, and I always had this heart for what can we do to be better stewards of the earth. It's probably the best way I could say it. And when I got to school, I couldn't hack all the hard science and all the math. Like I'm just not wired for that. So I dropped out after one semester. And I was really low. I would drank a lot and did a lot of drugs. And so I wasn't really, fit for being in school at that time either. But
What
I,
level of school is this? This is college you're talking about?
yeah, that was
Okay.
the first semester of college. I got into the only college in the entire world for just environmental science and forestry. And I think my parents pulled some strings to make that happen because my mom worked for the state university system for New York, and I really wasn't a qualified student for a math and science program. But I got in anyways, and I did really poorly there, and I drank too much. And when I called my mom and I said, I can't do this. I can't do physics and astro science and all this stuff. And she was like, okay, well, you can go to school in Binghamton. And, I thought to myself, what am I even going to do? And I, the only thing I knew how to do well was poetry, like write poetry and write little essays and stuff. And so I went and I got an English degree. I moved to Florida in the middle of all that. And when I graduated with my English degree, all I wanted to do was work in a bar or work in a restaurant, because I had this performance poetry habit that was getting really, it was really growing in me, this sort of slam poetry, performance poetry scene that was really exploding at that time. And it still is, but it was really just gaining momentum then.
Back up for a minute. For those
Yeah.
people who don't understand what slam poetry is,
Yeah.
give us the
Yeah.
abbreviated version.
So it's basically spoken word performance, poetry performance, and it's a competition. And every city has their own slam team, and they travel and they compete. It is competitive, but it's also like a big family, so everybody knows everybody. And yeah, they want to win, but they also love each other. And the way that and the style is it's very much street poetry. It's very much hip hop informed. You get, unlike the rest of the world, you actually get validated and win and get higher points the more raw and vulnerable and emotional you are.
Wow.
And the more real. And so people address some really tough stuff in there. Now, the way that we did it was we decided not to have, we had a venue and we hosted a poetry night. We decided not to do a competition, but it was the same style of poetry.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I was just so crazy about that. But after a couple of years, I was like, oh my God, I'm so tired of being poor. And I ended up getting really into this idea of marketing and digital marketing and communications. And
how did you make this transition from
mm-hmm.
being a performing poet,
Mm-hmm.
slam poet,
Mm-hmm.
to saying, oh my God, I think I can get into digital marketing and stuff like that? Wow.
It's
How did that even cross your mind?
It's so crazy how that happened. I took a trip to New Zealand, which is a whole nother story, but when I was maybe 20, somewhere between 22 and 25, I don't remember. And I met a Cherokee medicine woman there. I met a lot of Maori elders and a Cherokee medicine woman. And she told me, she said, if you don't become an entrepreneur, you're holding your soul back a grade in school. And I got really mad because I was kind of like a broke healer poet chick, protesting corporate whatever, doing all that stuff. And so I was like, I don't want to be a business person. They're evil and they're killing the rainforest. And so I asked myself the question, because she was often right. And I really looked up to her so much. I still do. And so I asked myself the question, if I was to become an entrepreneur, what would I do? And I went to a Barnes and Noble the next day just to walk around and see if I could get business ideas, and I didn't know anything about business. And this book just sort of like jumped off the shelf at me. And it was called The Online Success Secrets of the Internet Marketing Superstars, or something like that. And I read the book and I realized, oh, they're just doing what I'm doing, but they're doing it like they're just communicating ideas like I was doing in poetry, but they're doing it at such a bigger scale. And I thought, I don't know what I would do for a business, but I bet I need to understand this no matter what the business is. So I just dove in and I started learning. And one day I got an email from a guy named Max Simon, who you may or may not know. His father is now passed away, but he's Dr. David Simon, and he was the silent partner of the Troper Center. So I was on all these email lists trying to learn, and Max was like the business mentor to the yogi sort of spiritual people before everybody else was doing that, really. And he was looking for a content manager, and I thought, well, I don't know if I have a shot at this, but I know that I can write, and I know that I like what Max is talking about. And so I applied and I ended up getting that job. It was crazy. So Max, with his father being David Simon and all that, he quickly moved me from content manager to affiliate manager. And his affiliate partners were people like Bob Proctor and John Assaraf and Mark Victor Hansen. And so now all of a sudden I'm going from zero to being on the phone with these guys every day and interviewing them and working with them. And the level of expansion about business that happened through that experience was just astronomical. So that got me started in this crazy world of marketing.
So let me subset for a minute, because what I heard in your voice as you were growing up, and even in the story that you're telling about it, was there was like an angry young woman
Oh, totally.
protesting, right? And so has that anger fed what you do now? Has it disappeared? Has it integrated into it? How because the Mark Victor Hansen and Deepak Chopras of the world don't seem like they're looking for an angry little rebel to come and do their marketing plan.
Well, I don't think Max minded all that much, but maybe he did. I don't know. I think that for me, I did a lot of work with a lot of different spiritual mentors, and particularly the Maori, who are the indigenous people of New Zealand. They have a really beautiful way of embracing and healthily expressing anger. And, my Maori auntie kind of sat me down and yelled at me one day and told me, like, I should not be creating from anger because I could be doing a lot more if I tapped into a different energy. So I think the energy of anger can take us so far. And, if someone is abusing a child and you see it and you get pissed and you stop it, that's great, right?
Yeah.
But as far as building a movement or a business or something that really matters in the world and only using sort of one color in the palette, I don't know how effective that is. So I would say I would say there's some presence of that, but I've evolved beyond it as well.
Totally. You have to be. And so
Yeah.
what would you say to people that are listening? Because there are a lot of people listening that are sort of rebels or revolutionary or want to change the world. And there's a little bit of anger at the way, look at the world we live in. There's so much diversity that's going on right now, and people are yelling at each other. And so how effective do you think people are at communicating their message in the environment that we're living in, like even in the political environment we live in? How effective are their stories getting told?
I think if we looked at political, there's a lot of work to be done. And in fact, I just talked about that. I just launched a copywriting course a couple of months ago. And one of the things I said is like, look, election season is right around the corner. And if you don't understand some basic skills that I can teach in this course, people are just not going to listen to what you have to say. So it's like we can have all the beautiful sentiment in the world, but I think that understanding how to tell a good story, understanding how to write effectively, and understanding that from the perspective of marketing and copy is a really useful skill for people who have a strong political viewpoint to master, because otherwise we're preaching to the choir and people might be like, yeah, that's great. But if the point is to help other people maybe see another point of view, or to be received or to be heard, whether or not that point of view changes, but just not to shut people down even, then it requires an investment of time into learning a new way to communicate. And that's what I've been doing for a long time.
Yeah. One of the things that really intrigues me about you and the work that you've done, one of the things, or many things, but one of the things that really intrigues me is a lot of people can talk, a lot of people can tell a story, a lot of people can stand up and say what they want to say. There are only a few people that I know of that speak in a way that allows people to listen, and that listen in a way that allows them to speak. And I wonder if you can talk on that a little bit, because it's not only in the political world we live in, it's in everything that exists. Religions are fighting religions, spirituality and religion, North's fighting South, women are fighting men, whites are fighting blacks. Everywhere you turn, there is conflict going on. And so, to me, the beauty of a story is that it's the thread that weaves people together, because if you hit on the emotional component of what people want, it doesn't matter what side of the fence they're on. We all want the same thing. We all want to be loved and accepted. We all want to be heard and validated. We all want to be listened to and understood, right? And so it's almost like music, it doesn't matter if you're what side of the fence you're on or what border you live behind. A great song touches you. How do you craft that story for people that goes beyond the sides, the silos that they live in of like-mindedness, and comes into the place where we all just feel what that is.
I think that might be one of my favorite questions anyone's ever asked me. Excuse me, I have to cough though. Yeah, I love it. There's a couple things. And the first that comes to mind for me is that in storytelling, the more personal that we make something, the more universal it becomes. And one of the best ways I ever heard that explained is by a guy who is a storytelling mentor. He's more stage story. And his name is Bo Eason. And he shares this story about wanting to be the best, I think it was the best safety in the NFL.
Yeah.
But he couldn't even make the Division III football team at his college. And he shared this story about being in the locker room after they told him he couldn't play. First of all, he didn't make the team. Second of all, he kept showing up anyways. And then he went into the locker room and he's like, well, I'm going to have to get a jersey so, they don't notice when I keep showing up to play. And he's in the locker room and he sees a janitor and he says to the janitor, hey man, are there any like leftover shirts from last season that I could grab? And the janitor throws a jersey at him and he puts it on. And as it turns out, at the end of the story, he did actually become one of the best safeties in the NFL. He played for the Oilers and he went on to write a Broadway play about it. So he shares that little micro story about being in the locker room, and he obviously shares it in much greater detail than I just did. But what he said after he shared the story was that everybody who hears that story starts to paint a picture in their mind of like the locker room and the football field and the janitor and even if they've never, most people have never had that experience, right? It's an unusual experience, but everybody starts to relate it to a time where they really wanted something and they were told they couldn't have it and they go for it anyways. And so those neurons fire off in your brain when you hear something like that. And so that because it's so personal, everybody goes, oh yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when people go to tell a story, especially if it's emotionally charged, what they do is the story itself has an agenda. And that shuts down the listening. If I'm listening to a preacher in church who's using a story to make a point and kind of make me believe a certain thing, I'm probably going to go, I don't really want to hear that. I'm pissed right now. You're trying to manipulate me, And a lot of people, that's how they tell story because they do have an agenda. And that's not how we get into that sort of stories have the capacity to cut through all of our preconceived notions and get into that childlike wonder in our brain where we can be open to new ideas.
Yeah. So stay right there with me because I love this. I felt a little uncomfortable in the beginning because I didn't know where I was going with you, but now I think in digital marketing, obviously we're marketing something, and obviously there's a quote unquote agenda. I'm going to just use the word because the goal is to get people to participate, buy, do whatever we're doing, right? So what is the agendaless agenda of someone who wants to tell a story, wants to be vulnerable, personable, but even the story that you just told, it's a personal story, but it isn't that vulnerable. It's vulnerable, but it's not vulnerable. It's not like he talks about how he cried at the thing and he did, it's just the right amount of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right. That someone can say, I get this. And what's interesting to me coming at it from, because I'm a mosaic guy, it's what are those points that connect that like a mosaic, you don't have to connect the whole side to the whole side. You just have to connect to a tip and then let it grow and expand out from there. So how do you find when your goal is to market a product, to market a service, market a person, market that thing, that unagenda like agenda that tells the story that allows you to do that without doing that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it's a great question. No one's ever asked me it before, and I love it. So, usually in business storytelling, I will tell people you want to look at the transformational outcome that people are wanting to have. Now, you can do that. Obviously, I work in the transformation space, so it's easy to identify, but you can, Nike has done it with shoes, Apple has done it with computers. It's universally applicable. And you really look for what is the emotion state, or what is the transformational sort of quality that people are wanting to experience from what it is that you have to offer. And you look for stories that kind of bring people from not being in that state to being in that state. So then one could argue, well, that is an agenda, right? To serve an emotional experience. But I think where it's not an agenda is that you essentially want to tell stories that serve where people really want to go, and it is a service. But the buying decision is left to them. Like you empower them to decide for themselves, is this something I want or not? There's a lot of advertising and a lot of marketing and even a lot of storytelling marketing. There's a lot of like neuro-linguistic programming, and there's a lot of triggers, and there's a lot of like, let's kind of like trigger the fight or flight system so that they feel like they need to buy to feel calm. And I think a good story can actually empower somebody to access a part of themselves that's already there. And then if they want to, like take the next level of commitment, you show them how to do that. Like, okay, click here, or okay, join this Facebook group. And if they don't want to, there's no consequence, right? It's like the marketing experience and the consumption experience leaves them feeling better rather than worse.
Yeah. How did storytelling take on such a negative connotation? And not negative, but look, you told me the story as we started of a young lady who didn't go out and play, with other kids and doing what she was doing. She was concerned that she was going to be taken from her room in the middle of the night, right? I mean, the stories
by the Russians, no,
by the Russians, right? But we all create those stories, and those stories have so much power over us, and we know the effect of stories. So why do we fight stories that want to bring us to a place that we want to be brought to? And how do you create the beauty of what you do? And I need to play with you more, because I would love you to play in my world too.
Cool.
But the beauty of what you do is you take the bite, like all that anger that was there as a kid, you take the bite out of the story. And it's almost like to me, it's like the mosaic, which is so beautiful in that you just make a connection, and then that connection connects you to everything else around you, as long as you decide to take that connection. And all you really have to do is find that little place where people will resonate. You don't have to say, come here, and in 4 blocks you're going to hit that point, and this is what you got to do when you get there. You just have to find that place. Am I wrong in what I'm saying? I mean, like, how do you relate to what I'm saying right there?
Yeah, it makes sense. When you said, stories having a negative connotation, or stories, people kind of fighting stories, I think that happens when people are using story to manipulate.
Yeah.
I think when it's just good, clean storytelling, it's like you just get sucked into it. And we can see that in the entertainment industry often. Some directors will have an agenda, but a lot of times, and I was watching on Masterclass, I think it was David Mamet, and I may have said his name wrong. He's a big director, and he did a class on what is drama. And he basically said, look, if you have an agenda that you're trying to shove down people's throats, that does not belong in film. He was like, the purpose of drama is to entertain, and that's it. And then Aristotle, who probably is still to this day one of the most respected theorists on the purpose of story, he he said that the purpose of story, he said the purpose of drama, because back then the main form of storytelling was comedy and tragedy in live theater settings. And what he said about it is that the purpose of this is to give people a cathartic experience. So they come to a resolution of an emotional experience through the story itself. And I think if you try to stay in that lane, then, you know, and brands like I said, Nike and Apple, they really stay in that lane. Their storytelling as brands have served to not talk about how great their products are at all, not to be arrogant, not to tell you that you need to buy new shoes. You never see either one of those companies say anything about that.
Yeah.
It's like they've taken this stance of inspiring people to their greatness and their greatest potential, and their sales reflect that, you know.
Yeah, no, totally. I remember as a kid, remember that, I don't know if you're old enough to remember it, but Coca-Cola did a commercial
Yeah.
where they said and they had people climbing up a mountain, and we want to build the world the perfect harmony. And
Totally.
and Coca-Cola built its brand on happiness.
Right, exactly.
But there's nothing about a Coke I mean, they created this illusion of you're happy when you drink a Coke.
Totally.
Right? And so is that manipulative? Is that concentrating on a transformation that people want? Like, how do you see that? Because it certainly was a successful campaign.
It is. I would answer that, reference a book called Winning the Story Wars, which I think everybody in the whole world should read. And Jonah Sachs, who's one of the most successful story-based marketers, he did a video called The Matrix, and he did another video called The Story of Stuff. And it's both of them have like downloads in 50 languages and things like that. And one of the things that he said, he talks about the father of modern advertising, John Powers. And John used to write ads for like the old department stores. And he would go in and he'd check out the stuff for the week, and he would write an ad, and it would say something like, you know, necktie, it's not that great, but it's only $10. And it would like sell out. And the store managers would be so upset because they made them feel like it made them look bad, but they kept hiring him because he would sell everything out. And Jonah makes the argument that the companies that are doing what Coke did in the 80s so successfully, that the communication has advanced so rapidly, and social media has given so much of the storytelling power back to consumers, that that's no longer going to work. So if you actually want to do a campaign like that, your product better back the claim.
Yeah.
So one of the cases that he highlighted to show the failure of it is BP did a green campaign, and they spent a ton of money on it, and they wanted everyone to associate them with like a green planet. And everybody was like, but that's such bullshit. You spill oil everywhere. You don't clean it up. Your cleanup methods are worse than the spill in the first place, and we're not buying it. And same with Fiji. Fiji did a green campaign, and everyone's like, you're transporting plastic bottles all around the world. Like, we're not buying it. So I would only work with people that their product matches the promise. And on a cultural level, these types of emotional manipulations that people used to do are no longer as effective as they used to be.
Yeah, because now there's so much more there's so many more voices and so many more perspectives coming, and people have a way to comment instantly now in the world that we live in. But you even see it, like I'm starting to talk with some people from Microsoft, and that were part of a Microsoft alum community, and they've come together, and they have billions and billions of dollars that they have to give away because it's hurting them actually to be in situations where they have this money and can't give it away. And they're looking for conscious people to work with. And they're so good at making money that when they invest in a conscious company, $2 million, they end up making $4 million. And now they're $2 million more in the hole than they were before they were. And they had to give it away. But part of what's driving them is they know the effect that tech has had on the consciousness of people, both good and bad. And they want to create a world where tech is seen as a consciousness engulfer. They want people to feel more connection, more consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, again, it's sort of a similar thing, because now we're walking around with phones like this. People aren't talking to each other. My kids, they don't even talk to each other. They send little 2-3 minute videos or 2 minute videos and respond. They're not even 3 minutes or 30 seconds. And they make videos where they don't even communicate. They just communicate through the videos. So in a world that's moving in the way of technology, do you feel that helps your storytelling, or do you feel that detracts from storytelling?
I think that it's presents us with a unique moment where the collective story is really up for grabs, because it's like there's so much innovation happening, and it's happening so fast. And those people are in beautiful situations to really change things for the good, So it's interesting. And we're talking about Coke. I read an article just a week ago that said that Coke and Pepsi, I think, both agreed to stop using plastic products by 2025 or something. Wow. So that's a really big change in the world, that one person can make that decision, and I think that as companies are under more and more scrutiny, and as storytelling for brands becomes more of a non-negotiable, 10 years ago it was like a whatever, and now it's like a non-negotiable. I think that there's pressure for people to live up to the story they're telling. And I think in the tech industry, I haven't worked with a lot of tech brands, but I think that with tech, we have the most beautiful opportunity to create the fastest change on this planet, because they're just impacting billions of people. Like someone like me, my work has reached millions of people, but not in depth, not in the sense of okay, I have this computer in my pocket now, right? It's right. Like they saw an ad I wrote and they had a thought about it, and that was that. But when we look at people who are literally transforming the way of life for billions of people, then that to me is exciting. I'm like, let's hang out with them.
Yeah, no, totally. And one of the things that I really would like under separate conversation is to sit with you and talk about Mosaic Swarm. So cool. And this concept of what we're trying to do with a tech company that is called Swarm Unanimous AI. So where cool. They're using swarm intelligence to make the human mind think better. And the goal of what we're trying to do is bring people, real people, back into the decision-making process of how they solve their own problems. Amazing. Because I believe the new paradigm is changing to a place where vertical relationships are ending. And so, but I see it even in my storytelling. My storytelling is committed to a purpose. The reason I'm telling a story is this is a story, and hopefully you'll join the swarm. Hope this is a story, and hopefully you'll get my book, and hope this is a story. And it's mildly effective. Because it's effective because people who like the idea of it say, okay, in spite of you, I'm going to do it. Yeah. But what's intoxicating to me is how you can tell a story that touches something that makes people want to respond without manipulating them or overselling them or doing that. If you had something where you said every good story needs 3 things. It needs to increase wealth, it needs to unlock unlimited potential, and it needs to transform our shared world from disconnection to connection.
Yeah.
If you could tell people one thing about storytelling that would totally transform the way they look at the way they tell the story, what would you do? Can you do that? What would that one thing be?
I might have to say 2 things, but
say 2 things.
The first is that, and I was going to say this earlier, the first is that the best storytellers know their audience really intimately. So I think a mistake a lot of people make is they tell the story from a need to be heard instead of a need to fulfill an emotional experience that the audience is wanting to have.
So can you remember what point 2 is? Because I want to go into that.
Yeah.
Okay. So remember point two. Just
Yeah.
make a mental block of it. In the world we live in today, nobody's talking to people. People are talking to their audience, but they're not. I don't feel that many people are listening even to what the audience is saying.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem.
But they're effective. You look at the magnetism of a Trump campaign, whether you like him or not.
Yeah.
He's completely magnetic, and he brings people together that support him and want him and do it. And so there must be something inherent in his story that touches something that is touching people, whether you like it or not.
I can tell you exactly what it is.
Tell me. I would love that.
I wrote an article about this as soon as he got elected. This is my opinion, and I really believe it. I lived in the rural South for 3 years. And what I saw there, I'm from New York, upstate New York. And so I grew up in the Northeast. And then all of a sudden I find myself living in a town with 600 people in the South. And the main complaint I heard from all of them is that, they used to have a dirt road. They could let their kids run up and down the streets all day and never worry about them. They could leave their doors unlocked. They could leave their car doors unlocked. And their neighbors were all looking out for each other.
Yeah.
And they had family businesses from the last 200 years, tractor businesses, farming businesses, really practical things. Now, what's happening in the world is that every city in America is overcrowded. Like, it's just happening really fast. And so the cities are spilling over into these rural areas and engulfing them and bringing in corporations and bringing in people that, for better or for worse, these people are unfamiliar with, and it scares them. And it's bringing in more crime. It's bringing in all the problems that cities have that they never had. Yeah. And Trump did exactly, or his writers, right? I don't know. They did exactly what I'm suggesting to do, which is understand the pain of your audience and understand what they want. Because while Hillary was speaking in Philadelphia, he was speaking with a baseball cap and blue jeans to a town of 6,000 in Pennsylvania. I watched and I saw it and I was like, oh my God. And he told the rural people of America, I'm going to get like the globalization out of your little village, and you're going to get your little village back, and you're going to get your way of life back. That's what he told them. And basically what happened in that election is that more rural Americans, they don't have a great track record with voting.
Yeah.
More rural Americans showed up to the polls than any other campaign in American history.
Yeah. So I want to stay not political. Okay?
Yeah. But that was the story.
No, I love it. And I love what you're saying. And you're saying you're being completely not political. I want to continue in your vein. But then what happens when you tell the people something, not Trump now, but anybody? What happens when you win the support of people by telling them what their pain point is, but you don't necessarily have the power to deliver on the points that you promised? What does that do to people, and what does that do to the reliability of a company, a person, a project? Because it's easy to say, I'm going to solve all the problems.
Right, of course.
Right? It's easy to find pain points and say, here we go, I'm going to fix those for you. But what happens when the world, so what happens, one, when you can't do that? And two, if you can keep a second question in your mind, what happens when the actual model of the world, the paradigm of the world, is changing to a place where people no longer are going to be able to fix people anymore, but rather people are going to come together, and by coming together in their unity, they're going to fix things. They're going to change things in the way their harmony of coming together will change things. I mean, the message that I feel wants to be told so much by the Mosaic, and this is not a personal counseling session because I know that's not what we're doing. But the message of coming together, of unity, the message of coming together, we're stronger when we're together in a world where we're separated. Is that not the message you want to hear? It seems like almost the message people want to hear is, we are stronger than you are, and divided we are stronger, and we're going to take you over. Yet underneath that, or above that, there has to be this sense of, together we can do something more.
Yeah, and I believe that has to, this is something I learned in a copywriting course. I actually believe that has to do with people's brain development. So I was taught that there's three parts of the brain. It's called the triune brain. And the first thing a message or a story has to do to get buy-in is pass the reptilian part of the brain, which is fight or flight. If it can pass that, it can start to go into higher level values of the higher parts of the brain.
So
So
how does a story pass fight or flight?
it has to give people a sense of safety. So if we're talking to people who are afraid of their entire way of life being disrupted, like the example I just gave, and we want to tell them, hey, maybe difference is okay, maybe change is okay, we have to bake into that story that they're still going to have food on the table. They're still going to have survival taken care of.
Yeah.
When they feel certain that survival is not a issue, they can then go to like, oh, maybe people who are different than me are not a threat, right? This is like 60
Love
million
this.
years of brain science. Like, so some people have evolved into more of the higher level brain capacities where they understand that maybe solving problems globally is actually more important than what's in their bank account, right? But not everybody is there.
Yeah.
Most people aren't. So that's what I have to say about that. I would love to see more people like those stories. And you can see like in a film that maybe shows two people, two groups in conflict, right? Maybe it's like two warring tribes or something. Something usually happens, like two of the people fall in love, or something happens where everybody else goes, huh, like the lights go on and they go, okay, maybe we don't have to be fighting this war, maybe.
It's West Side Story. I don't know if you're old
Yeah,
enough to remember West Side
yeah,
Story, right? They're the two gangs fighting each
yeah,
other, and the head of the gang falls in love with the sister of the head of the other gang, and they fall in love, and it's Romeo and Juliet. It's all, I mean, it's all your classic archetypes of
totally.
battles that go on.
Totally. Yeah. And so like we can bring in a higher level value of safety or of love or of trust and let that higher level value guide the telling of the story. And that's a way to do it too.
I love that. I mean, that's so insightful because so many times, like, I'm just, I feel like a fairly evolved guy, a fairly intelligent guy, a fairly, that I feel like I can connect to people pretty well. But what you just said completely throws me on a loop because
Mm-hmm.
people can't hear a global message until they know that they're safe on a local level.
Exactly. It's the most important thing. I've been writing copy and telling stories for marketing for maybe 8 years now. I didn't learn that until last year from a copywriting mentor. It changed everything about the way I wrote because I was
Wow.
like, oh, if I'm threatening someone's survival, why the heck are they going to listen to me?
Yeah,
And a lot of people aren't willing to. It goes back to what I said about if you want to tell a story that people hear and get and pass on and have this opportunity to change the fabric of consciousness in the world, right? Which I think we both want to do,
totally.
then you have to be so empathic and so empathetic to the listener that you're willing to understand, their pain. It took a lot for me to understand the way of life of a town in the South with 600 people, but I did it.
Yeah.
And I feel like a broader, more diverse, more aware, more empathetic person because I was able to. And they understood me. They were like, okay, this Yankee, you know what I mean? And like,
Right. So, do you feel like those points are dramatically different whether you're in a town of 600 people or in a town of 10,000 people or a town of 2 million people? I mean, do you feel the safety that people want in all those different places is really that different?
in a sense, and then not. Like everybody, I believe every human on the planet wants the same basic things. We want to belong. We want to have our basic needs taken care of. We want meaning. But I do think that the quality of life is very, very different in cities versus rural areas. And there's pros and cons of both. And because of those distinctions, I would have a different conversation if I was like selling something or trying to tell a story. I would have to say it a little differently depending on where people live.
So beautiful point because it brings up, and don't forget point two because we want to come back before we shut down. But
Yeah.
um, When you work with people, do you give them a collection of stories depending on where they're talking to, or do you narrow down their niche so
Hmm.
that they're only talking to this one particular voice? And hopefully, go ahead. That's my.
Yeah, I really try to get them to commit to one. If they can't commit to one, I can work with it, but it's a lot harder.
So for the classic person who has no niche, who says, I want to appeal to the world at large because I think we want to solve a world problem, you say niche it down.
I would tell them you need to look at the person who's most likely able to respond to and contribute to that problem. So if I wanted to get clean water technology in every city in America, I wouldn't just tell that story to everybody because not everybody cares, right?
Yeah.
But there's a certain person who does care, who has the means to actually do something about it, and I would figure out who that person is and I would tell it to them. I'll give you a great example of this. I was walking into a anti-human trafficking organization in Austin, Texas. I volunteered for a day to help them with their messaging. And they told me, I'm like, well, who are you talking to? And they're like, everybody. And
Right.
I'm like, well, everybody doesn't care. Everybody doesn't even know.
Right.
And to make a long story short, we were able to look at the demographics of where they were living, which was Austin. And I just said, look, your value is freedom for people that are literally slaves. You live in a city, it's the fastest growing entrepreneurial sector and tech sector in the country. What do entrepreneurs care about usually is freedom. Let's do a values match story strategy where you're appealing to what matters to the people that live here locally. And you're also appealing to their local pride of like making Austin a slave free city. And they got a grant, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They won a really competitive grant after they narrowed down on what they were talking about.
Well, and I say, wow, but your story is your career is laden with stories like that,
Totally.
where just the way you've shaped something has brought back incredible results to people.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me point two
Yeah.
of that
Cool.
I hope you held it still.
I did. So the other way to tell a story that people remember and want to share and pass on is to understand that story comes from conflict and the resolution of that conflict. And I wanted it to be something else when I first started doing this work because I didn't like it, but there's no way around it the more I've learned. So a story is basically two opposing forces. It's, if we think of duality, there's light, there's dark, there's hot, there's cold. It's always trying to work itself out and go back to unity. That's kind of what alchemy is, and that's what story is. And so a story always starts out with there's this and there's this, and we're trying to bring it here. And if you can frame your story around that, it automatically becomes emotional for the listener because this is in our DNA. So, and the story itself becomes a set of steps that happen between naming the conflict, naming what's at stake if the conflict doesn't get resolved, like loss of life or loss of way of life or whatever. And then the steps that happen, that would be called the plot, the steps that happen to resolve the conflict. And then that's that catharsis Aristotle was talking about when we see a tension and then it comes into this climactic moment and resolves itself. That is the emotional catharsis that we're seeking as viewers.
Yeah. And some of your brilliance is you can do that in under 3 minutes.
I try.
which, which it almost took that long to explain it, right? So, I mean, it's amazing how beautiful that process is because people don't have that much time.
Right, exactly. You got to be quick.
So if we're winding down, and I want to be sensitive to your time, and thank you so much for being here.
So fun. I love this stuff.
I always close in the same way, which is, if people were to do the work that if people were to work with you or do the work that you suggest, what would they walk away feeling?
I love that. I think for most of the people I work with, whether they're solopreneurs or bigger companies, they feel two things. They feel, actually three. They feel fully expressed but they feel expressed in a way that feels in alignment for them, which is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And they also feel empowered. So, I work with sometimes really big publishing companies, and they're like, we're doing the online marketing thing, and we feel like this is out of alignment with what we actually publish, like what we're told to do online. And I'm like, oh, well, you don't have to do that. Let's do it this way. And they're like, just like, whew, okay, so.
Wow. I love that. And then the final question with a follow-up is, when you look at the world today and you see all that's going on, is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to your children and your children's children, and whether you have children or not, but the future generations? Is this the world?
Not at all.
Okay.
No.
And so if there was one thing you could suggest to people that would, because if we keep doing what we're doing, that world's going to be what we hand over, right? The momentum is only going to get stronger. If you could say one thing to people without anger that would be heard without judgment, what would be that one thing that you would say to them that might actually move the needle, being the exquisite storyteller you are that takes conflict situation and finds that place of resolve? What would be that point that you would give to people to say, if there's only one thing you do, try and do this?
I think to the point of your book, being this fully expressed archetypal journey into your own best self, it's like, that would be the thing, because there is no one thing we're all meant to be doing. I'm really passionate about cleaning up the oceans and ending human trafficking. But if I told everyone, hey, do this because it's going to solve all the problems in the world, which I believe it will, but if that's not their calling, then they're going to be miserable, So I say, do the thing that you're here to do, that you're a little afraid of, and it will work out. Because I believe, like I always tell people, my mission of my company is to change the global story. And they always say, well, what story do you want? And I'm like, I want the real story. I don't know what that is. But if everybody lived in truth and did what they're here to do, we would find out what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like.
We have to talk more. I can't believe we're this close. And because first of all, I love that. And one of the things that I really am trying to develop, thank you so much for everything you've given. I want to work with you. So if there's anybody out here that doesn't want to work with you, they're absolutely crazy. They've lost their mind. But I want to highly encourage everybody to go to KylieSlavik.com. I want you to look at what she's doing. I want you to get involved with her. I want you to get engaged. She has courses. She has things that you can do, or you can work directly. I don't know what's going on. But here's the place that really resonates for me, if I can summarize for me, and where you completely touch my soul. Is that when I came out, I felt like this is for everybody. This is a work. The Mosaic is a work for ordinary people, and ordinary people are everywhere. Where do you find them? What's the niche of ordinary people? They're the gardeners and the road workers and the homeless people and the executives who aren't want to be executives but aren't. They're the sales guys in the car. They're the juice makers. They're all those people. And what I realized is, as I started to tell my story to people, some people just weren't interested. And I would spend a lot of time trying to convince them, like, why don't, like, I know you, I know what you love. And why doesn't this interest you? Until one of my friends literally got so mad at me, he walked up and walked away and hasn't spoken to me since. And what I realized at that moment is the work that I want to really create is the minority of 1 billion.
I love it.
And I love the Zen Cohen-ness of the minority of 1 billion, because 1 billion doesn't seem like a minority. But in the world we live in, there are 8 billion people. So 7 billion people will not want to do what I'm doing. They'll think I'm a dreamer. They think it's not practical. They think it's never going to work. They just don't agree with it. They don't even like me. They don't like what I stand for. All that stuff. Right? and all that's fine. They have every right to do that. But the story we want to tell is for those 1 billion people that say, yes, this is what I do want.
So
And
good. Oh, I just got full body chills.
well, I want those full body chills to be. I want you to be frozen because I really want you to help. I really need your help because
Awesome.
the way I'm telling it is not effective. I don't feel like I'm getting out. I feel like there's so many people that want to help in this. I mean, my book is in the hands of incredible people. There are people that are in using AI and swarm intelligence that are set up to want to help me to do it. And I'm not landing those planes because I believe the story I'm telling is not the correct story. And it doesn't resonate in that place where they say, yes, let's go. And yet everybody that I speak to says the world, I'm not everybody, 96% of the people I talk to, when I ask the question, is this the world you want to hand over to your children and your children's children? Say, no, not even close. And the really beautiful people will say, well, the world's a lot better now than it was 200 years ago. I mean, we were we were stoning people to death.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that.
And you're right. And not even
yeah,
we're so divisive right now, and they're tech companies are using information to literally divide us even more. And so unless we come out with a compelling story that counterintuitives those that work, we will continue to be more divided and pick on each other more and more, when that is not what any of us want. All of us want to see a United States, a united world, a united where we take care of each other like the town of 600 people. I believe every city is like the town of 600 people where they wish their neighborhoods were like that. Right? And so how do we play that game, and how do we give what we need to the people that we give, so that they feel involved in their life again, and they feel that they're part of their decision-making process. And so if I've done nothing else but tell you how much I want to work with you and do that, then that would be worth this conversation. But I hope that my desire and my passion of what I feel from what you're doing is telling anybody who's listening here, and I don't even know how many people Kylie can take or how many people she will take, but if you have a message and it's not getting through, if you have a message that you want just one simple or two simple, I say simple, but it's not easy because she spends hours and hours, crafting these things, but weeks sometimes probably. But if you want that message crafted in a way that you will resonate, get on her website now. Send her an email, give her a call. And Kylie, from I was going to say from the depth of my heart and soul, but it's even deeper than that. I so admire you and the work that you've done and the work that you're doing. And I believe your work hasn't even started yet. I believe there is a global place that you will play in the world, that the stories that the world needs now have to be more than just product based. Or entrepreneur based or service based or whatever they are. The stories, we really need to tell stories that will shape the future of our world for our children and our future generations. That's the place I want to play with you and figure out how we can do that in a way that I can afford you, a way that it can happen, a way that you can afford me, and just like walk with you, because there is something incredibly powerful here. I see it. I feel it. I just am stuck in the middle. I don't know how to get there, but you might be able to help me.
Yeah. Well, I will say, let's definitely have a conversation. And just even in this conversation, I feel so inspired by you. I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I only want to impact 380 million people? I just jumped it up to a bit. Like, I feel so lit up with my own inspiration just from talking to you and hearing the questions you asked me. No one's ever asked me most of those before. And I just so grateful for this time that we created to share together.
It's my honor. And this is personal, but I still want to have you over to the house. Cool. I can't believe we haven't gotten that together.
I know, it's crazy.
Like, let's make that happen on national radio, on national podcast.
I know.
Let's make it damn happen. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kylie. And for all of you who have listened, I hope you have taken away something incredibly valuable. And I hope you'll stay tuned. So if you like this episode, please like it on iTunes. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe to our channel. And get over to KylieSlavik.com. Look at her website. It'll thrill you. It'll intoxicate you. And for those of you who will be around, we'll see you next episode. Thank you and so much. Ciao.